A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICAN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So today we'll start the day with the quote of the day, which is taken from Bhagwad Gita, which says, Karmanyevadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma palahe turbo mate sangotsva karmani. So it means that we have to focus only on our work, that is our duty, but we should not worry about the results or the fruits of our work. So only when we are able to focus religiously on our duty, excellence will automatically follow. So we must not be anxious about the results. And this is very apt because there is so much of uncertainty about the holding of the prelims examination also, and many of the students are very anxious and nervous about the same, when the exam will be conducted. But the right approach is just to focus on the study, just to be in the present, take one day at a time and focus extremely hard and make the best utilization of every single day as though tomorrow is the examination. So this should be the approach. So even in ethics we have a concept called as Nishkam karma, which means that you do your work without expecting any results. So when we do our work very extremely dedicatedly and with all sincerity, then the results will definitely follow. This can also apply in ethics and also in GS paper 1. So I remember that when I was writing mock test series, I had a question in the art and culture segment of GS1, which was like, what is the contribution of the religious literature in shaping the values of the people, or something like that. So in this case, the religious literature have a tremendous contribution in how they shape our value systems. So I had written this shloka in English, and I had explained that this helps us to be in the present and neither be worried about our past nor about the future and be anxious, but rather be in the present and focus on what is to be done, what is our duty, that is only should be focused upon. So in this way also you can use this quote to illustrate how it has shaped your religious, or rather your value systems. So now with this we will start with the first topic of the day, which is the India-Nepal relations. So we know that recently this boundary dispute is going on between India and Nepal. So the issue was that India had been constructing a road from Dharchula to Lipu Lake, which was actually to connect to the Mansarovar Yatra route. But Nepal had reservations with the same, that it is occupying a part of the Nepal territory. So in the recent today's news, Nepal has come out with a new official map, political map, in which Kalapani, Lipiadura and also Lipu Lake have been shown as part of Nepal territory. So this India has held that is violating the territorial sovereignty. And also there have been mainly border disputes with respect to Kalapani, Limpiadura, Lipu Lake and Susta, and these are the only two areas where there have been differences in the border issues. But now Nepal has come out with an official map itself telling that these are its own areas. So India has held that this is violating its territorial sovereignty. Also, the India stand has been that India and Nepal have traditionally had very good relations, the civilizational ties. So this issue, whatever the border issue was there, should have been solved using diplomatic negotiations between the two countries, that is at the diplomatic level. But what Nepal has done is to unilaterally come out with a new political map which has all these territories shown as part of Nepal. And then what is the role of China in all this? So the role of China has been that the Chinese ambassador had visited Nepal and had also held backroom diplomacy with Nepal, and even India's ambassador to Nepal had also commented that China has had a lot of influence when it comes to the political aspects in Nepal. So that was what the former Indian ambassador to Nepal, Ranjit Rai, had told, that China is playing a very huge role in Nepal and it's heavily involved in the Nepalese domestic political processes also. So this was the Chinese role, and it is playing the role of this backroom diplomacy role is being played by China also in this case. So this is the issue with respect to India and Nepal, and also how China is influencing India's role with its neighborhood. So this is a very important topic. The next thing we will be looking at is the India's defense sector. So the article started off by saying that India has been one of the largest arms importer, and in fact earlier it was importing nearly 12% of the global arms imports, but then Saudi Arabia has jumped to the first place in 2018 and 19, but India still takes over 9% of the global arms defense imports. So in this backdrop, defense self-reliance and indigenization of the defense production is extremely important, because we want to save on our import bill through the defense imports, and two, such huge amounts of defense imports will also expose the country's vulnerabilities and weaknesses. So therefore, defense indigenization is extremely important, because we have been one of the world's largest arms importer. But when we come to defense indigenization, there are several issues which needs to be tackled. So the first is there have been delays in acquisition. So the Indian government had already approved over some 200 defense acquisition proposals were there, which were already approved. And these over 200 defense acquisition proposals, they were valued at more than 4 trillion rupees. But still, all these proposals are at very early stages of processing itself, and they have not moved forward from there. So we have to re-examine the entire approval process to streamline it and to avoid such huge delays in the acquisition. Because if we delay the acquisition, then all our arms and machinery will become obsolete. So therefore, we need to streamline this process so that there is timely acquisition of whatever proposal has been made. This is the first issue when it comes to indigenization, and this is what we have to do. The second issue is about the ordnance factories. So these ordnance factories have been, they are called as a backbone of indigenous supplies, because they supply everything to the armed forces, right from the weapon systems to the spares, ammunitions, auxiliaries. Everything is supplied by these ordnance factories to the armed forces. But however, when we talk about they being responsive to the technological changes and the quality that is demanded by the armed forces, then they are somewhere lacking. So therefore, we need to also revamp the ordnance factories also. And for this, the suggestion is to corporatize these by including at least some of them, listing some of these units also, so that there is some freshness and there is a better catching up with the latest technologies also, and that is very important. So to integrate these factories with a larger defense manufacturing ecosystem, it is important that these be reformed either through corporatization and then through induction of fresh ideas and modern technology. So this is the second thing we have to do in our efforts towards indigenization. The third thing that we have to do is regarding the weapon upgradation. See, one bottom line is that no matter how much we develop the indigenous capability in defense manufacturing, definitely we have to import some or the other thing. So we cannot manufacture each and everything. So if something is being manufactured which is good in other countries, we definitely can and should import it. But at the same time, we must understand that when we are importing something, at least the next upgradation of that thing, we must have the ability to do it. So if we have, we should plan for how the arms and spares and ammunitions, whatever we are importing, will eventually have to be upgraded, and that capability we must develop. So therefore, we must develop the repair, maintenance and overhaul facilities, so that we are ourselves able to upgrade these weapons platforms which we have imported. So we should not be dependent on the foreign countries even for an upgradation in whatever we have already imported. So this weapon upgradation capabilities should be developed. So this is another important thing we should do as a step towards indigenization. Next is the role of foreign direct investment. So the foreign direct investment cap in the defense manufacturing has already been liberalized, taking it to the limit of 74% under the automatic route. So this has to be used as an opportunity so as to have joint ventures between foreign and the Indian companies for defense manufacturing. So, but however, this doesn't happen much even after liberalizing of the FDI limits. So, therefore, the processes will have to be streamlined. There has to be more transparency in the decision making process so that the opportunity to have more joint ventures between Indian and the foreign defense manufacturers that can be utilized. So, this is the next thing that we have to do when it comes to indigenization in the defense sector. The next thing, important thing, is the perspective planning. So whenever if you talk about indigenization of defense, so definitely the role of the public and the private players in the defense manufacturing will come into picture. But these private players, they will want to know what is the plan of the government for the next decade or two, because military is not something that if we buy one weapon today, tomorrow itself we will need another weapon. That is not the case with military. So if I buy something today, it is only after a decade it is going to go obsolete, and only after a decade I am going to buy a new weapon. So therefore, the defense industrial units, be it in the public or the private sector, they would want to know what is the plan of the government in the next decade or two, what the government plans to buy. So this perspective planning has to be provided by the government to the industry so that the industry has better clarity on what is the requirement on the defense sector and what it has to produce. So this is very important. So the next thing is the L1 principle. And the L1 principle is whenever a partner is to be selected for manufacturing of in any defense platform, so the L1 principle is used. That is, whoever bids for the lowest financial bid, that entity is selected as a partner. But then the argument is that this should not be the principle of selection. So it is not the lowest financial bid that is needed to be selected as a partner, but rather the level of indigenization, how much indigenous content the entity is able to contribute. Based on that, the particular entity should be selected as a partner, not on how cheaply it can deliver things to us. So this is another modification that we need to bring to be able to enhance our indigenous manufacturing. The last one is to be able to provide a level playing field, which means what, now there is definitely a difference in the way the private defense manufacturers are getting treated compared to the public ones. So therefore we need a transparent policy and a level playing field that has to be created so that every industry, whether it is public or in the private sector, is able to participate on a same footing. So for this we need to remove the conflict, the conflicting role that the DRDO is playing. So DRDO is the government's advisor. It is also the developer and evaluator of the technologies. So this has to be addressed and a level playing field has to be provided. So for instance, the ordnance factories, they enjoyed a different privilege when it compared to the private industry. So those differences must be removed, and the role of DRDO has to be harmonized so that there is no conflict of interest. So, and thereby the private sector is also provided a level playing field. So these are the steps that needs to be taken if India has to come out as self-reliant in the defense manufacturing, and also to enhance the indigenization in the defense sector. So with this, we will move to the next topic, which is impact of health on economic growth. So in this article, I didn't find much useful, but nevertheless, the topic itself was very important. So what is the impact of health on the economic growth? So there are two ways of how health can impact economic growth. One is through labor productivity, and the other is the economic burden of illness itself. So labor productivity means whenever a person is of poor health, then he will not be extremely efficient and productive in his job. So this is extremely direct, that poor health will affect labor productivity. The second thing is the economic burden of illness itself. So whenever people in a country are ill, the country will have to spend a lot of its monetary resources to treat the ill people. So this again, a lot of resources go waste in treating people. So therefore this is the economic burden of illness. So when we talk of the economic burden of illness, it can be of two types. One is the direct and the other is indirect. Indirect means, as I said, if some people are ill, then resources will have to be spent on treating them. The second type of economic burden of illness is more indirect in nature. So for instance, if a child is not able to get good nutrition, there is poor cognitive development, so then the child is more prone to infections and diseases. Because of that, the child's educational attainment and skill attainment will be poor, and thereby in his adulthood the income earning capacity of the child will also reduce. So this in turn will reduce the contribution in economic terms to the country, thereby reducing economic growth. So this is the indirect economic burden of illness. And we talk about Robert Fogel's findings in this case. There's a Nobel laureate who said that he spoke about England's economic growth. He says that in the last 200 years, anywhere between 33% to 50% of the England's economic growth has been because of improvements in the people's food consumption. So he is linking economic growth to food consumption, which is definitely an important aspect of good health. So similarly, there have been several cross-country macroeconomic studies that have been conducted. So these studies have established a clear relationship between life expectancy and growth rate. For instance, it was seen that the life expectancy, when it increased from 50 years to 70 years, so that is just a 40% increase in the life expectancy, led to rise in the growth rate by 1.4 percentage points per year. So this was a relation that was established between life expectancy and the growth rate. Similarly, when it comes to disease and the growth rate, it was seen that a 10% decrease in malaria is able to increase the annual growth rate by 0.3%. And similarly, for malnutrition and growth also, it was observed that malnutrition actually caused a decrease in the annual GDP growth rate. So this was some aspects of linkage between health and economic growth. So you can also draw a flow chart like I have drawn in the screen. So if there is poor economic growth in the country, then many of the people will be living under poverty. If they are living under poverty, they may not be able to give good nutritious food to the children. Then they will have poor cognitive development, and also they will be more prone to infections and diseases. So this will reduce their learning capacity. This will lead to poor education and skill development. So when they grow up, their income earning capacity will reduce. So when such people start earning less income, then it will all again contribute towards poor growth rates. So this is how health and economic growth are linked to each other. So now with this, we will move on to the next topic. Yes, before that, this health was covered in a Yojana magazine of I think April month 2020. So in that, it talks about 4 pillars of healthcare. So whenever you have any question being asked on health, you can talk about the 4 pillars of healthcare, and within these 4 pillars you can organize your answer. So the first is a preventive healthcare, affordable healthcare, quality healthcare, and then mission mode implementation. So whatever you want to write, you can categorize it into these 4 pillars, and then you can organize your answers. So this was there in the Yojana magazine. So just look into what the budget 2020-21 had regarding health. The total budget allocation for the health sector as such was 69,000 crores, of which Ayushman Bharat and health and wellness centers, so that itself got 6,400 crores. And also, in order to set up good hospitals in tier 2, tier 3 cities, the budget said that viability gap funding can be used for that to address the supply side constraints and to setting up hospitals in smaller cities, like especially in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So viability gap funding could be used. And budget also talks about use of frontier technologies to ensure the reach of healthcare services, like using artificial intelligence, machine learning. So through this, implementing solutions through telemedicine. So that is what the budget has spoken about. So this were some of the important highlights in the budget regarding health sector. So next topic is the role of NGOs and example. So the newspaper had an example about an NGO and its contribution. So in the GS2 paper, you have civil society organizations, NGOs, self-help groups and all that. So you must have a collection of examples of NGOs and NGOs and what role they have played in policy formulation, implementation, evaluation, everything we have already discussed in detail as part of a question. And we have also come across and discussed several examples of NGOs also in the past. So this is one example of NGO which is named as Youth for Social Development. So this NGO has now been distributing sanitary pads to women free of cost, who have particularly the women migrants who have been now crossing states and walking on the roads for a very long distances. So this NGO is giving them sanitary pads free of cost so that they don't have any infections and their basic hygiene is maintained. So this activity it is doing under a project called as the Kishori Shakti project. This project is run by the NGO itself. So under this project it is trying to seek out to reach out to women and then help them, particularly the adolescent women. So this is the example of NGO which you can use in the answers. Next is use of law as a weapon. So this article was basically talking about how the Epidemics Act 1897 is being misused. So this says that Epidemics Act first of all was an act that was enacted in the colonial times in 1897 itself. So that any effort that is made by the state to curb the epidemics should not be challenged by the people, so as being too harsh or anything. Epidemics Act has been invoked even in the past to deal with swine flu, cholera or even dengue for that matter. But however, it is being misused in the present case recently while dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So what is happening here is that mainly it is related to the misuse of Clause 4 of the Epidemics Act. The Clause 4 says that any action that is being taken under this act will be provided immunity from any legal proceedings, because it will be assumed that whatever action the authority takes under this act will be taken in the good faith. So because it is a pandemic and people have to be protected, so whatever action is taken, that will be taken in good faith, and therefore those authorities will be provided with complete immunity and there will not be any legal proceedings instituted against them. Now because of this immunity, several harsh measures are being taken. For example, an FIR was filed against a Bengaluru technician who had COVID-19 for hiding the information. But however, when this happened, the COVID-19 pandemic in India was itself very new and nobody really had the knowledge about this. So, but FIR was filed against the technician that he was hiding the information that he had COVID-19. So this under this act it was done. And similarly, even the Mumbai police had invoked the Epidemics Act and they had arrested a journalist because the police held that the journalist had wrote something on social media, because of which there was unrest among the migrant workers in Bandra. So because of this, under this law, the police had arrested the journalist. So these are some of the examples of misuse. So you may have a question about law and ethics or whatever, whether whatever is legal is ethical or whatever is sometimes something that is ethical is illegal. So you have these kinds of questions in ethics, which had also come once in one of the previous year questions, I think before last year. So in those questions you can use it as an example that the Epidemics Diseases Act, while arresting somebody for this, is arresting a journalist in the case of Mumbai police, is completely legal under the Epidemic Diseases Act, but is it ethical is the question. So this example can be used there. So now we'll go to the next topic, which is the women's labor force participation. So basically this whole article had nothing to do with women's labor force participation. It was regarding providing social security, especially to the women who are in the informal sector, who are working in the informal sector. They have to be provided social security. And when I say social security, it can mean healthcare, childcare, it can mean insurance, pension, and even housing. So the whole article was about giving social security to women in the informal sector. But I found one thing really very striking here is the role of SEWA. So SEWA, as you all know, is Self-Employed Women's Association. So what SEWA has done is it has formed these childcare cooperatives, so that those women who are working, they don't have to worry about their child at home. Many women, they drop from the workforce only because they have a child and then there is nobody to take care of them at home. So the SEWA had come out with this concept of childcare cooperatives, where uh, they pooled up the resources, and in these cooperatives the children would be taken care of, so that the mothers can go to work without worrying much about the kids. So this concept is, I found, is very interesting, which can be emulated to increase the labor force participation of women. So the reason being that SEWA had conducted studies in which it found that there was a link between labor force participation and the motherhood. So they saw that the working women of India, the studies showed that the women's incomes would double as a result of full day care for their young children. So SEWA study showed that whenever women had somebody to take care of their child, their incomes nearly doubled. So based on this analysis, they set up the child care cooperatives, so that mothers can, without worrying about their children, can go to work, and they can also participate in the labor force. So this can be used as a case study when you have any question on why women's labor force participation rate is falling, what are the reasons, and what should we do about it. So in all that cases, you can use this example. And we have already discussed about why women labor force participation rate is low. So we have done a detailed discussion on this question. So now we will be discussing the previous day's question. The question was, what is the definition of organized crime? And the next part of the question was to discuss the reasons for drug trafficking across the Indian borders. So if you have to define organized crime, one way is to take some standard definitions, like UNODC, about which we spoke yesterday, has also given a standard definition of what an organized crime is. So similarly, there are some such standard definitions of organized crime. But what I personally feel is these definitions are extremely complex, A, to memorize, and B, even if I read somebody by hearts and it writes it on in the answer, and if I read that answer, I don't find it very appealing, because I know that for a fact that it has been by hearted and just written on the paper without much understanding into it. So I rather would prefer you to suggest you to write your own definition on about your own understanding of what organized crime is. So in simple words, a crime that is the crime that is done in an organized manner is an organized crime. So what do you mean by organized manner? Organized manner means several things. First of all, there is continuity. They have a corporate structure. They have a centralized authority. They undertake meticulous planning of the thing, and the entire thing is kept extremely secret. So these are some of the characteristics which make a crime as organized crime. So this way you can make a very simple explanation of what an organized crime is. So crime that is done in an organized manner, it can be transnational, national, or local also. So by organized, we mean that there is continuity, there is a separate corporate structure, there is centralized authority, there is planning, there is secrecy. So these are the characteristics which make crime an organized one. So when we talk of the types or examples of organized crimes, it could be drug abuse and drug trafficking, smuggling, money laundering, terrorism and narco-terrorism, even kidnapping for ransom, contract killings. All these are examples of organized crimes. So now we'll come to the second half of the question, which is about the reasons for drug trafficking in India. So across the Indian borders. So when we talk of the reasons, the first reason is the proximity to the hotspots of the where the drugs are being produced. So that is the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle. So in yesterday's video, we have seen in detail what Golden Crescent is, what Golden Triangle is, and we also saw the diagrams, and these diagrams will have to be replicated in the answer. So the first reason is India being in between these two. India is kind of in between, one on the Golden Crescent and on the other hand it is a Golden Triangle. So even if India is not a destination, but even if it is a transit route, it has to go through India also. So that way India becomes the passage for the drugs also. The second reason is that there is indigenous production also, because many of these are prescription drugs. Some of these are used in treating epilepsy, and many cough syrups have these drugs, and opium is also used for pain management for terminally ill patients. So India having a very vibrant pharmaceutical industry, several of these drugs are indigenously manufactured in order to help deal with these diseases. So however, when they are manufactured for medicinal purposes, some of it will also get smuggled and trafficked. This is the second reason. The third reason is also the prevalence of darknet. So there have been reports, even UNODC has held that there is a global trend of purchasing the drugs over the internet, particularly the darknet, because it provides with anonymity and secrecy. So particularly in darknet, people have been purchasing drugs on the internet, and trading platforms using cryptocurrencies. Such things have already spread across South Asia, including India. So this is what the UNODC has also told, that is the use of internet, particularly the darknet, and also using cryptocurrencies, where through which these drugs are getting purchased. So next is the high demand for the drugs that is present in India. So in India there is a very huge demand for the drugs also, because the youth are also too much attracted because of social influences. There is a huge demand. So this demand itself generates this demand makes India a very good market or destination where the drugs could be trafficked to. So therefore people are ready to pay, and there is a huge demand. This is another reason why there is trafficking. The next is the nexus with the terrorism. So as we say, it is an organized crime. Organized crime means there are several networks which operate seamlessly in a smooth manner, and they have a networking with each other. So there is a nexus between the drug traffickers and criminal networks and terrorists. So the money that is generated by the illegal sale of narcotics and drugs, that is used for financing the terrorist activities. So this is another reason why there is drug trafficking also. So and when we did talk about the indigenous production of drugs, we do have a law called as Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act, which says that these narcotic drugs which are produced for the medicinal purposes should not be used for recreational or non-medicinal purposes. But however, that is not so the case. So these are the reasons for the drug trafficking that is occurring. And if we come to the solution, you can talk about Article 47 of the Directive Principles of State Policy of Constitution, which directs the state to bring about the prohibition of consumption of any intoxicating drinks and drugs that are injurious to health, because state has the primary duty to improve the public health. And similarly, we have, as I just now told, we have legislations like Narcotics and Psychotropic Substances Act. Then we are also a party to several United Nations conventions, like the Convention on Narcotic Drugs, Convention on Psychotropic Substances. We are a party to all these, and apart from that, there is also the Narcotics Control Bureau is there. So that is also there. This is in the Department of Central Excise and Customs. So this also plays a huge role in preventing drug trafficking and drug smuggling into India. So these you can mention as part of the solution, and and also these porous borders and how we should go about dealing with it in order to deal with this example. So we also organized crimes, they rely much on transfer of money also, and their flexible networks. So freezing all that money and all is very much important for this international cooperation and these United Nations conventions. Implementing that in spirit is extremely important. So with all this, you can conclude the answer. So today's practice question is analyze the changing dynamics in the India-Nepal relations. It is a 10-marker question for 150 words. Also today I had some issues with my iPad, so I was not able to do it from there. I made a PowerPoint presentation. So let me know if you want me to go about this way or do you want the earlier way. So that's it for today. Thank you.